So basically, what we're going to be talking about today is using technology and innovation to improve your clinical trials. And I have my panel with me that'll just talk through some of those insights. So I'll just introduce you all. So we have our Promptworks software engineer, Ray Zane. Andrew Croce is one of our UX UI designers at Promptworks. And we have Adrian Gerasio, who is a licensed clinical psychologist and an assistant professor at Drexel. Do you all just want to introduce yourselves briefly?
I'm a software engineer at Promptworks. I worked on the Drexel project with Adrian, and excited to tell you all about it.
Hello, my name is Andrew Croce. I'm a user experience designer at Promptworks for about 6 years, and I've worked on various kinds of products, including health and medical devices and various other kinds of technology solutions.
And I'm Adrian Gerasio. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and an assistant professor at Drexel University in the Weight, Eating, and Lifestyle Sciences Center. So my work is mostly focused on conducting clinical trials with the goal of improving treatment outcomes for eating disorders and obesity. And I have a particular area of interest in the use of how digital health technologies can try to help enhance outcomes from traditionally behavioral and psychological treatments.
Awesome. Thanks, Adrian. So today we'll just be talking a little bit about patient engagement and custom applications. So, patient compliance and retention are critical to the success of clinical trials, but they're also two of the hardest variables to control, with average dropout rate across all clinical trials totaling about 30%. So Adrian, do you mind telling us more about the difficulties in traditional patient engagement that you've come across?
Sure. So I would say this is one of the biggest challenges that we have in running clinical trials is, to be able to get good data on how effective a treatment is. We really need to be able to retain individuals throughout the duration of the clinical trial and make sure that they're actually getting the full treatment that we're hoping to be able to test. So when individuals, drop out of the clinical trial or we lose them to follow up, it can make it really hard for us to interpret our results and to learn something meaningful from the clinical trial. And there's something, we hear this a lot from our patients, is that there's all kinds of barriers and challenges that could come up that can get in the way of patients, really being engaged in the treatment process or, staying involved in the study. So for example, in clinical trials, there's a lot about the research that can be somewhat inconvenient to the patient. We're often asking them to fill out a lot of questionnaires. We're asking them to devote a lot of time to coming into treatment sessions. On top of that, they have to come into their research assessment sessions. There's often a lot of logistical challenges to doing some of that. We hear from patients all the time that maybe they forgot about their appointment or other life barriers kind of came up and got in the way, and they didn't know how to kind of get a hold of us to reschedule or to be able to kind of let us know that they needed to move an appointment. Sometimes we hear from patients that maybe they weren't totally clear what all was involved in the clinical trial from the beginning. We try to do a really good job, consenting patients and making sure that they understand what they're signing up for. But sometimes these clinical trials can be so complex and there's so many moving parts that it can be easy for patients to not fully understand what all of their roles and responsibilities in the clinical trial, which can again lead to missing data or lead to patients kind of getting frustrated or kind of dropping out of the clinical trial. Additionally, because we're asking so much of our participants in terms of filling out surveys or doing interviews or coming in and kind of doing a lot of work, we sometimes can hear that patients don't feel like they're appropriately appreciated for all of the effort that they're putting into the work that they're doing. That we feel like we're really focused on the data side, but we don't necessarily always recognize the kind of human connections here and kind of all of the work that they're putting in. And then lastly, in clinical trial research, participants are often randomized to receive a certain type of treatment. And we know that when participants are in a treatment that is working and they feel like they're really getting better, they're much more likely to stay in the treatment. But even if someone is in a treatment approach that they feel like is not working for them or that they're not getting better, we still really need them to stay in that treatment for us to be able to tell if the treatments are working as expected. So if people are dropping out of certain conditions at higher rates, that can make it really hard to understand and interpret the data. they call this kind of, in fact, that condition stagnancy, that if someone feels like they're stuck in a treatment that's not working for them, they're really likely to drop out. And that can make it really hard, again, to kind of find differences between our treatment conditions.
Awesome. Thanks, Adrienne. So, something that we're going to explore is what technology and specifically mobile applications can do to address some of these difficulties, specifically in patient engagement and retention. And Andrew, would you like to talk this through just a little bit?
Sure. So I think based on a lot of the problems that Adrienne just talked about, one of the biggest kind of things that mobile apps can do is increase the accessibility of all the tools and content that users need in order to take part. So we know that mobile devices are almost completely ubiquitous these days. I think something like nearly 100%, something like 97% of Americans own a cell phone. Most of those are smartphones. And even among groups that we might traditionally think of as, less users of mobile devices, it's still incredibly ubiquitous. Really being able to bridge various divides. So people who live in various parts of the world, in rural, underserved communities, smartphones and mobile technology has the opportunity to really kind of even enhance the diversity and inclusivity of clinical trials by reaching more people. So that's really one big area is just the accessibility of the technology. There are some other kind of thoughts about how mobile technology in general can create different opportunities. So like the trial we worked on with Adrienne, we were connecting to Bluetooth devices, and there are a lot of opportunities to kind of connect to wearables, various kinds of biomedical sensors, and do that anywhere, and not just sort of in a laboratory setting, which maybe would have had to be done in the past. So there's a lot of opportunity to kind of use these new wearable devices, connect via Bluetooth, to kind of expand what clinical research can be and how it can be done in different kinds of environments. And sort of the last point is just the ability to collect data more efficiently and quickly, and kind of keep up with technology, so to speak. So in the past, the collection of data has been a bottleneck, really. That just collecting data is expensive, it takes time, and like we said, having to do it in a laboratory setting or something, makes it difficult, makes it expensive. So the ability to do that quickly and efficiently on someone's mobile device really just helps improve the efficiency of being able to collect data and collect more data.
Great. And Andrew, you're in UX. Why is UX important to engaging and retaining patients?
Well, I mean, Adrienne spoke to a lot of the issues that patients experience when they're trying to navigate this world that's really, for most people, alien to them. We have to remember that the participants in studies are not physicians, they're not academics, they're not professors, so they don't really, a lot of times, like she said, understand what the implications of it and what exactly is they're doing. So really making sure that the information, the tools that we provide for participants to navigate these trials is really patient-centric. Really, that means we use language that's understandable to them, that addresses their goals and their needs, and what are they trying to do? Are they trying to schedule an appointment, contact their physician, keep track of symptoms, or whatever it might be? That those tools are really centered on helping them perform those tasks, and are not overly academic, overly medical, and are not really convoluted and difficult for them to really understand what they're doing. So, and part of that is sort of the navigation of the tools. So things like search engines, for example, these are completely ubiquitous. People have high expectations for how search tools should work. So making sure that we have high quality search engines built into our software, kind of reducing the number of steps to get from point A to point, making sure that the kinds of calls to action are really again, that they need to do. And really, lastly, making sure things that they fit on screen in some cases. So a lot of the tools now are, again, built for desktop computers and don't adapt to smaller screens, or not optimized for them. So really making sure that we design these clinical trial tools to be mobile first, that they work on mobile devices, because as we said, that's really going to engage people better.
Great. Awesome. Okay, cool. Now we can just talk about Drexel. I need to adjust because of the sunlight. All right. So Adrian, we'll be talking about, the product we built with your team. Do you mind telling us, what was your vision for the product? What did you need? What were you looking to solve?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, I do most of my research in treatment, development, and evaluation for individuals with eating disorders. And in particular, I mostly work with individuals with binge eating spectrum disorder. So individuals who eat very, very large amounts of food and feel out of control when they're eating those large amounts of food, and then often engage in things like purging, self-induced vomiting, laxative use afterwards to make up for the amount of food that they've consumed. So one of the biggest things when we're treating these patients from a behavioral or psychological treatment perspective is we know that one of the biggest things that can maintain binge eating is that often our patients engage in cycles of very restrictive eating outside of their binge episodes. So what this might look like is someone, is, concerned about their weight or their shape. They maybe eat a very, very small breakfast. They skip lunch. They go long periods of time without eating. They come home at the end of a workday, they're absolutely starving, they're having really significant cravings, and then they end up having a very large binge eating episode. So, when patients come into us, they're often most distressed about the binge eating episodes, but what we actually need to get them to do is to be eating more regularly outside of their binge eating episodes. So to be eating breakfast, lunch, snacks throughout the day with a good range of macronutrient content. So things like proteins, fats, carbs, fiber, things that are going to keep them full so that when they come home, they're not immediately going to end up having a binge eating episode on whatever is available at their house. The tricky thing, though, is a lot of patients don't actually comply with our instructions to eat regularly because they're worried about weight gain, or they're worried that it's not going to be effective. And so what we really needed was to have a better way of helping patients outside the therapy office stay adherent to what we call this regular eating schedule. So eating every 3 to 4 waking hours and eating a good range of food groups. So we were trying to think of how can we, extend the reach of traditional behavioral treatments to help support patients in their daily home environments. And we thought technology could be a really good way of doing that. And in particular, we were interested in exploring the use of a new type of wearable called continuous glucose monitoring that can give you basically an estimate of when people are eating and what types of food that they're eating. So are they actually eating enough food and the right types of foods to kind of lead to predictable spikes in glucose that we would expect when patients are eating regular meals and snacks. So we wanted to create a product that basically let us integrate treatment with a continuous glucose monitoring device and then share that data with their treating clinician so that the clinicians could actually see what kinds of eating episodes is the patient experiencing in their home environment. And how does that link up with what the patients are telling us they're doing? So are they telling us that they're eating breakfast? They're monitoring it in their app that they're eating breakfast, but we're not seeing a spike in glucose that we would expect. That might suggest to us that maybe the patient's not eating the right types of foods to cause that spike in glucose that we would want to see, or maybe they're misreporting what they're doing, which could have really big treatment implications and help guide the clinician to better work with that patient. In addition, we also wanted to kind of intervene in real time. So we also worked with our partners over at UPenn to kind of develop an algorithm that could interpret the continuous glucose monitoring data as it came in and tell us when a person has gone a long period of time without eating a meal or snack. So we can kind of remind the patient in their day-to-day life when they need to be eating more regularly. So that's kind of the problem that we kind of came in with, and then kind of went to Promptworks for help in trying to figure out how do we create a tool like this.
Awesome. That was great. Ray, do you mind? So you worked with Adrian on actually building the product. Could you tell us a little bit about how you built it, what it was like to integrate a mobile app with the glucose monitoring devices?
Yeah, sure. So integrating with the glucose monitor device is tricky. Last time I checked, only one glucose monitor actually offered an API that we could integrate with. And unfortunately, even that API didn't meet our needs because it didn't provide real-time data. So for this application, that wasn't going to help us. There was a 3-hour lag on all of the data, so we couldn't intervene in real time. Luckily, they let us have access to their Bluetooth SDK, so we were able to overcome that hurdle. So based on Adrian's experience, we knew that patient compliance would be significantly better if they were able to use their own device instead of like carrying around an additional cell phone or something, which ruled out being able to use target just a single platform for this app. As a result, React Native seemed like a good choice because it maximized the amount of code that we could share across the two platforms. The only code that wasn't shared across the platforms was the code that integrated with the SDK, because the SDK, there were two SDKs, one for Android, one for iOS. When it came to releasing the app to patients, we opted to forego the app stores in favor of releasing betas via App Center. So App Center was a nice tool where we could, every time we made a change to the application, a new build of the app would be created and distributed to our beta users, such as Adrian and other participants. And once we decided that the build was stable, we would roll it out to patients. The limitation of App Center is that if there's a maximum number of users that you can have, and it's a little bit tricky to add somebody to the beta. But this seemed like less effort to us at the time than actually rolling out to app stores and getting through the approval process and waiting for approval every time we want to push an update. And the issue of being onboarded was mitigated by the fact that patients meet with their clinician before their portion of the trial begins. So the clinician was able to help them be onboarded. All of the data that was collected in the app was sent to the cloud for processing. And the other reason we did that was so that we had all of that data that Adrian could then cite and explore more deeply. But it also gave clinicians something to look at when talking to their patients. We didn't store any personally identifiable information, which meant that we didn't have to deal with HIPAA, and that saved us a lot of time. We didn't have to worry about security as much because at the end of the day, it was just, glucose levels and logged meals, and no one was identified. Every 15 minutes, we would look at the readings we had collected and decide whether or not the system should remind the patient about the skills they had discussed with their clinician. So we had an algorithm that would churn through these readings and tell us what we should do. And if it looked to the algorithm like the patient hadn't eaten on a regular basis, then we would send a notification out to the patient. The system would then show clinicians about the events that had transpired throughout the week, and they could see the patient recorded a meal or when the patient reported a symptom, which I hope helped them in discussing with their patients. And then a chart would show the glucose levels throughout the week alongside the meals and the symptoms that the patient had encountered. So you could see the peaks and the valleys in the glucose, but you could also see the meals alongside them. So yeah, it was a difficult project to build. There were a lot of integrations. We had the Bluetooth SDK. Ideally, we would have just had an API, would have made things a lot easier. We had the algorithm was written in C, so we had to bind to that, and the algorithm would churn through those readings and give us those indications. So it was a challenging project.
Awesome. Adrian, would you like to share, I mean, do you have anything to add on to that first of all? And then could you share kind of, once it was built, the results you experienced?
Sure. So the project that we were working on was a 2-year project, and we basically spent the first like 6 to 9 months in development, and then the rest of the time was spent running a small pilot clinical trial where we were actually getting data on the feasibility, the acceptability, and some preliminary hints of efficacy of this product. So what we did was we ran a clinical trial with 30 individuals. All of the individuals had either bulimia nervosa or binge eating disorder. And they worked with one of our treating clinicians and got 12 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy. And they used the app and the continuous glucose monitoring during those 12 sessions of therapy. So basically, the participant wore the continuous glucose monitoring device for 12 weeks. They tracked all of their food intake and any other eating disorder symptoms on the app that Promptworks created. And then at various points in the clinical trial, we either turned on or turned off certain parts of the system so we could try to get a sense of when those features were turned on. Did that actually help outcomes compared to when they were turned off? So that's a type of clinical trial design called an AB design. So basically we would have 2 weeks on where participants were able to view their glucose data and able to get these kind of reminders to eat when they weren't eating. And then 2 weeks off where they were not getting those types of reminders and not being able to see their data in session with their therapist. So we just finished the clinical trial a couple months ago. So we're still very much in the midst of data analysis and trying to kind of make sense of the findings. But I can say in terms of like feasibility and acceptability, we were able to kind of get folks to wear these devices, which was great for us. Continuous glucose monitors are actually a minimally invasive product. It inserts a small needle under your skin. It's a flexible, like plastic type of sensor that stays in your skin. But we were worried in the beginning that individuals with eating disorders wouldn't be willing to wear these devices for 12 weeks. And we did get actually good compliance with individuals wearing the devices. We definitely ran into some challenges with getting them to consistently use the technology, which is always like a challenge, I think, anytime you're using digital health products, because as Ray noted, we definitely ran into some challenges with the fact that the SDK would kind of drop the connection periodically, or that their app would kind of lose connection with the continuous glucose monitor. So like you can see on the slide here, that kind of big chunk that's missing from the graph, that's like an example of a time when like we would get some missing data. And so participants had to go into the app and manually reconnect to be able to kind of reestablish a connection, which was definitely reported as like a frustrating part of the process. So I think that's definitely kind of an area where, as we continue moving forward with testing this type of product, is figuring out ways to kind of minimize those kinds of disruptions and kind of connection issues. Just because those types of things put more burden on the user and make them less likely to continue using the products. This is kind of going back to what Andrew was saying before, the more you can make a product that is like as minimally burdensome as possible, the better you're going to get with like retention and compliance throughout the study. So stay tuned. We're hoping to kind of do the final data analyses in the next like month or two to see if we were able to actually get some impact on eating disorder symptoms.
That's great. I hope you tell us what the results were when you're all finished. Does anyone have anything, Adrian, do you have anything else to add about the project, or Ray, that we didn't talk about?
Nothing on my end.
Okay, cool. Awesome. All right, so I'll just conclude. Thank you all for being here to talk us through this topic, share about, your results with Drexel, with our team, building this technology, and just talking about how technology has impacted your clinical trial process, Adrian. So if anyone has any questions after this video, you can always contact us. Here's my personal email and phone number. So let us know if you have any questions for our team. We can get you in contact with any of our panelists today. And thank you all very much.